Hey, yeah, hi, this is Tom Scully, and we're on Scully Says, and you can reach us on a number of different platforms. We have a special guest today, and how about that special guest introducing himself so we all know who he is?
Is that you? Is that
Sure.
me? That's
No,
me. I'm the special guest. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. My name's Chuck Pullen. I am a local commentator and just sort of overall rabble rouser here in the region. I've been doing local radio for I don't know about 15 years now. I've been against everything, and we talk about everything. I've been against all of it. So that's kind of what I do.
yeah, it's funny because I've heard Chuck Poland on the radio for a while, and it's different when you see somebody. You have a different idea what the person is when you hear them on the radio and you actually see them in the flesh. Although I have seen you one time before, but still, I thought I'd make that the comment. So we were talking a little bit about what we were going to talk about today, and I think one of the things we were going to talk about was the Mr. Barack's thing over there in Chicago. Yeah,
Right? We can talk about
and
that.
I just was just going now a little bit. And is that not the ugliest building that you've ever seen?
Absolutely is, but I mean, I guess that's sort of part of art, you know. Art is in the eye of the beholder. But yeah, I mean, again, as far as something that's going to be on the lakefront and part of part of Chicago, it definitely doesn't fit in. But maybe that's part of the statement. Maybe that's the idea. Is maybe he didn't fit in either. I don't know, but
Well, also it just seems to me it's a different type of structure, different type of idea than all the other presidents have had. All the other presidents have had what they call like a library.
right.
Yeah, this is not a library. I mean, it's got a basketball court there. It's got and I just don't see the idea. I don't see the building. I don't see the idea. I don't get it, and I don't think in generations to come that people are going to get it. I don't think it's going to stand for anything generationally.
Well, I mean, it's interesting though. I've seen that it's already, basically sold out for the next few months already. So, I mean, again, is that because he's a different kind of guy? I mean, normally a presidential library is kind of a boring place. It's memoirs, things like that. But this is more, like you said, a cultural center. And maybe again, that's kind of his style, to be different, be a different kind of president. But also because of, the community it's in and things like that. That's sort of the thing is, he built it right down the street from his house there in Hyde Park. And, Chicago still has sort of he's got Chicago has a soft spot for him, even though his policies may not have benefited them the way they expected.
So yeah, you say Chicago's been a sore spot for him, but it seems that he's got as far away from that sore spot as possible. Maybe out there to Hawaii
To
or maybe
Hawaii, right?
to Washington D.C. But I haven't seen him around Chicago recently, except to for this building of his.
No, you're right. I mean, I go by his old neighborhood once in a while, and it doesn't seem like he's been there, for a while. And again, that's sort of an interesting thing. Is you're right. I mean, the same guy who said, the oceans are rising, bought late oceanfront property in Hawaii. So much like a lot of people that lectured about, the oceans and things like that. But that's an interesting thing about politics. Everybody, I mean, he wasn't necessarily a wealthy man. He was just a senator when he took power, and now he's worth tens of millions of dollars, like many people that go to Washington, right?
Yes, well, it seems as though yeah, and so that leads into we were talking a little bit earlier about Elon, right?
Mhm.
So you wonder how he got from Barack to Elon. Well, the difference is that you have a guy like Barack who basically the only thing he was a politician. He's always been a politician.
Right.
Hasn't really built anything, hasn't made
He
anything.
wrote a book. He wrote a book, and that's about it. So
Yeah, he did
he
that.
went on a speaking tour like everyone else does when they leave
Well, I
Washington.
think even Joe Biden supposedly has written a book, and so is
Yeah.
Joe Biden. I mean, everybody's kind of writing a book. But we've got to him, and then we go to Elon Musk, and so there's a big difference between the two of them.
Well, it's interesting though that so Elon Musk becomes a trillionaire because of the SpaceX IPO.
Yes.
And it's been interesting to see one of the biggest problems that I see with our society is that people don't understand the difference between currency and wealth. So obviously in Elon's case, it's tied up in stock. It's basically he owns all of this stock. His you create a business, you IPO, you get money, but again, it's on paper. And if you're the CEO of a company, you can't sell that stock because everybody goes, what's wrong with this company? Why is he selling the stock?
Yeah.
So Elon really is cash poor. They say he lives like in a tiny house. He lives very frugally, like a Warren Buffett kind of guy. But this idea that people don't understand can't differentiate the two. And so what I've been seeing a lot on social media is this idea that you have there was people on social media that literally were claiming that Elon Musk controlled half of this country's currency. Like he keeps it in a giant vault or keeps it under his bed or something, right? But again, we know even from the laws that were crafted several years ago for unrealized gains, Elon is pretty cash poor, right? I mean, and that's sort of the thing is, any money that he's made, he's used it to leverage to build other things. And so that becomes the point is here's a guy and the media will say, oh, well, something about his father's emerald mine, all these things that are completely unfounded. He leveraged one company to another. And here's a guy, you can see the tangible assets. You can ride in his car. I was recently in Vegas. I went into his tunnel.
Okay.
He's got the tunnels underneath the Las Vegas Convention Center.
Yes.
Neat concept. And they're building those in a couple other cities. You can see his rockets go into space. You can go on his social media. So here's a guy who, uses his wealth to build tangible things. And a lot of people say he saved, Twitter and became X. So he's doing tangible things, but also because of his relationship with Trump and things like that, the world hates him. I mean, and also you can talk about Doge. I think that he was one of the few people that went to Washington with the intention. It's sort of the joke I say with Elon. At one point they created that law and he wrote a $15 billion check. When you write a $15 billion tax check, you're allowed to go ask where it went, right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of the thing about Doge is I think what he realized is he thought he can just go to Washington and, open the books and say, okay, here's all this. He didn't realize what he was up against. And not only was he up against Washington, but he had a whole group of people that were, firebombing and, vandalizing his. I mean, it had a huge effect on him and his businesses personally.
Well, I think that's also the same thing that happened with Trump. I
Right.
mean, particularly in his first term, Trump was really not a politician, and nor is Elon a politician by any stretch. And so when they operate by different rules, and so a lot of times they get caught. And Elon, I don't think he was prepared to deal with the Washington types. And I think in the beginning, I think Trump was all that willing to deal with the Washington types. But now it's come to the point that I think that Trump has kind of got the idea. And I think Elon got the idea that he's not that type of guy and he's moved on. I did want to point out the fact that when you talked about Elon, you talked about money is on. I got a kick out of the fact that he had people that were standing next to him. I think 4,000 people.
So 4,000 millionaires, including cafeteria workers and everybody else, because again, in that industry, you come in and you get stock options. So they got discounted stock options. And again, it IPO'd. And it's an interesting thing. The same thing happened with Tesla. They called them the Tesla millionaires. So the same thing happened with Tesla. But it also becomes an interesting problem when you're building a business and all of a sudden everybody down to the janitor and the cafeteria workers are millionaires. A lot of them probably aren't going to come into work the next day, right? They're going to say, well, I'm a millionaire now. I'm happy. You're a working class person. All of a sudden you're worth 7 figures. You say, well, I'm good. I'm going to go retire and enjoy life. So he may have problems filling in. He may have a lot of vacancies now, right?
Yeah, well, but when you take a look at Elon, you take a look at the fact that he's made all these people money. He's made them money.
Right.
If you take a look at these other people that are criticizing him,
Right.
what money have they made for other people other than themselves?
Well, even the idea of running a business. I mean, I always tell these people, I said, you can always tell who's never run a business. It doesn't matter if you're running a law firm or running a construction company. We run into, I run small businesses. There's always new rules. There's always new, you need this permit. This law has changed. Now this is different. It's a constant battle of, keeping up with regulations and sort of, it's always a frustrating thing. Why did I just have to why am I spending this much money on this thing I don't really need? And you can always tell who's never had to really go into those sorts of things. I even think about, Bill Maher, for instance, who's a very, very well-known liberal, but then when he tried to build a solar panels at his property, tried to change a garage door, once he had to go up against government to do something seemingly simple, he realized how hard it was. And that sort of thing, these people that have never had to go do that, never had to start a business, or even, for a lot of us, we put a lot on the line. It's always the joke about, owning a business. You're the last one to get paid.
Yes.
We're the ones that, some people mortgage their homes. They put all their life savings into something.
Yes.
We take the risk And yet we don't, it's sort of the thing is, and this is that argument I have with these people on social media is why would even look at Jeff Bezos? He's, for every Jeff Bezos back in the 2000s, there was thousands of other .coms. You were around for the .com bubble. All these people that didn't become Jeff Bezos.
Mhm.
A lot of people, they put a lot of money into .coms and the bubble burst and everybody lost a lot.
Yes.
And only a couple people became, there were only a couple Jeff Bezoses, right? So that becomes the question. If you're going to come in and say, well, if you become Elon, if you become Jeff Bezos, we're going to take 85% of your, well, why would I spend my life building a business? If it works out, you're going to take it from me. You're going to take most of my wealth from me. You're going to tax my unrealized gains, which means I can't even build a business because you're going to tax me money that I don't have while I'm building this business. How would Elon have been able to do the things that he did if they would have taken his wealth out of, if they would have extracted his Tesla wealth, he wouldn't have had that wealth to leverage to do tunnel, to do SpaceX, to do all these things, right? I mean, that's the thing is think about what we wouldn't have if they would have taken that from him up front.
Yeah, well, of course, these people, like a guy like Elon, is taking a risk. I think that's what most people don't understand, the risk that you take.
Right.
I mean, if you would say to the average person, go mortgage your house, take the money you have in your house and start a business, how many people are willing to do something like that?
Mortgage your house, put in 100 hours a week, and there's no guarantee you're going to get a return.
Yes. I mean, sort of like the restaurant business.
Right.
You open up a restaurant business and 80% of them fail within the first year or so.
Right.
And they've not only failed, but you've lost all your money, and now you're starting back from where you have a person that goes to work every day, and they get a salary, and they get a salary, because the person that took the risk in the first place.
Well, and that's an unfortunate thing that one of the things I've been tracking is historically the number of new businesses being created was going down for a while. It went up a little bit during COVID because everybody was at home and was thinking of ideas, but we saw a huge decline in new businesses. And so what I always say is this idea that, if you have if you have less competition, you have less new people coming to market, then all you're going to have is you're going to end up in a world where you have just the Walmarts and the Amazons and no new ideas come to market. Nobody's building businesses. Nobody's building that, Main Street America. Then what are you going to have? You're going to have just a world of big box and chain stores, right? I mean, that's the problem that I worry about with people not creating businesses.
Yeah, no, it's true. But then again, I'm kind of amazed by one of the places that I'm amazed by is a place like NVIDIA.
Right.
Now, this place, you're thinking to yourself, all these big companies like Walmart that are kind of they're taking all the space up, but you get a guy comes out of nowhere, and it's not the only place with this new AI thing that's coming up. There's a whole bunch of these startups that are starting around.
Right. Well, but again, with something like that, there's such an R&D cost in making chips, making chipsets. It's such a complicated thing that you essentially only have a handful of players in the market. So if you happen to be in that, you have that timing where I can scale up my business to meet demand. All of a sudden we went from NVIDIA used to make graphics cards so I can play video games on my high-end computer. Now, they're sold out for months because the data centers they'll take whatever you can make, we'll take it kind of thing. I mean, again, it's just a luck of the draw that you had, your timing was right, that you created a product that just had this huge spike in demand. Will it keep up? I don't know. But I mean, even for those of us, like I build computers and things, to see the cost of hard drives and RAM and all of the things that have just gone up exponentially for a small business that, needs computers. Now my cost of building a computer went from $1,000 to several $1,000s. Yes. Times, however many you're trying to bring new people into your business. And now I have to spend all this money, to build my business because of this demand. So,
yeah, no, it's difficult. I know it, like with NVIDIA, but he started out with basically nothing, didn't he? And I guess the question is, how do you generate enough money in the beginning to build the business?
Right.
I mean, it takes a long time, I would imagine, to generate. By the time you generate enough capital to build the business, somebody else has already taken over for you. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and that's the thing. Historically, one of the things that I've learned about ideas is that a lot of ideas, you even look at things like, what happened to McDonald's, what happened to ESPN, all these ideas where the guy who came up with the idea
Yes.
didn't necessarily, he wasn't the one at the end that took it to the end. He's not the one that, he had the idea,
Yes.
but then he started making deals with other people to get them involved because he needed that money.
Yes.
And then one day the people with the money said, you know what, we can find somebody better to get this to the finish line. Well, it was my idea. Well, not anymore. Now it's our idea, right? So, I mean, historically, that's one of the things is when you give up control of your idea, sometimes you lose it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, that was McDonald who gave it to Kroc, and Kroc took it
Right.
from there. Yeah.
So you might have a good idea, but somebody else ends up bringing it to the market and, making it that juggernaut.
Yeah. Well, that is a problem. I mean, it does seem to be a problem now where you have a great idea, but you've got the idea, but how are you going to put that into reality, that idea? You're going to have somebody with the money is going to be able to take that idea that you came up with and use that idea, even though they never had the idea in the first instance.
Well, but not only that, one of my jokes is always whenever I come up with an idea, I said, I've got this good idea. How is government going to stop me from doing it? Right? What are the barriers? What kind of permits? What kind of laws are in place? Whenever I come up with a good idea, I go, how is government going to stop me from doing this? So that's the other barrier, is that, people don't understand just the costs of getting a business started, permitting and things like that. I mean, that by itself is, I think about the idea that when we had, our ancestors came, it's always funny when, all these people that came from Europe or wherever, it seemed like they always came and started a general store or something like that.
Yes.
He came here with nothing and started a general store. Well, today, if I came here with nothing, it's $1 million to build that store. You know what I mean? So just to start a little restaurant or start a little store, like how did, these guys say, I came here with $7 in my pocket, somehow started a store. You can't do that today. The cost to just get off the ground, just the permitting cost is, the tens of thousands of dollars.
Yes. Well, I suppose that if you start with very little, and then you start developing something, by the time you have enough money, it's not going to happen within the first year, second year. It's going to take you 10, 20 years to come up with enough capital to actually do enough.
Right.
The only other way you can do it is you leverage the business. You get somebody to finance it for you. But of course, when that happens, you give up the control.
But again, that becomes the argument, is I'm going to dedicate my life to starting and building a business. And then as soon as it's successful, now all of a sudden I'm in an 85% tax bracket and everybody hates me. I mean, so what is, why would the next person say, I want to be the next Elon Musk? There's no, we've gone from looking at people like that and saying, wow, we look historically at inventors and people like that, Edison and people like that. Look, they weren't perfect people, but history remembers them fondly for their inventions. And today we hate everybody that's inventing things and doing things. So,
well, Steve Jobs is a perfect example. His family hated him. People that work for him were not big fans of him, but
right.
But he, we wouldn't have the phones that we use today if it wasn't for Mr. Jobs. We wouldn't have Apple. We wouldn't have a lot of computer stuff if it wasn't for
right. But then also a lot of people on social media will say, well, Elon didn't build that car. Well, Steve Jobs didn't build that phone. A bunch of people in China did. But the idea is this idea that somehow building a phone or building a car, this idea that, well, Elon didn't build that. Well, yeah, somebody had to put up the capital. A bunch of people just didn't show up one day and start building a car. Somebody had an idea. Somebody put up the capital to build that factory, to go through all those hoops, to put up the money to design that car. It didn't just happen out of thin air. And that's the problem, is people just keep saying to me on social media, well, Elon didn't build those things. You're right. He didn't. He hired people and now they're millionaires because he hired them and gave them stock options, but they can't appreciate the effort that went into getting there and the sacrifice that people make. And that's the problem that I'm concerned about, is for it, we need to keep this country growing. And if the next generation, if we're demonizing, the producers,
yes,
then what's going to happen?
Yeah, no, because it seems as though what we're doing is we're punishing
Right.
the people that come up with the ideas.
Right.
And we have people, for whatever reason, the people that do not produce are insisting that the producers take care of them.
Right. Well, and that becomes an interesting question. I mean, that's one of the things that for me, I always talk about, is this idea that if we're going to punish the successful, then why would I be successful? Why am I going to put that effort into it? Why would I put that effort into it? But then also, yeah, there's that idea of, Even when you look at Social Security or anything like that, you know, we've been talking about this for years. Social Security, now they're saying we're, you know, 5, 6 years away from seeing a structural deficit because you've got more people at the top. I mean, again, I've always said Social Security was a pyramid scheme.
Yes.
You know, when the population
Yes.
didn't work out, it was a pyramid scheme based on the idea that population would continue to grow, and now we're sort of shrinking a little bit.
Yeah.
And so same idea, but you know, that becomes the idea is that when I can look at things, and I always tell these people, I say, you know, there are a lot of people that they don't want to put in. I put in 100 hours a week. I run businesses. I'm doing side things. I'm doing consulting, and I enjoy doing that. There are people that their goal in life is to, you know, smoke a little weed and play video games, and that's fine. But you can't criticize me for being successful because I put in the work. I've been putting in the work my whole life, like a lot of people. And for you to come in and say, well, it's not fair that you're successful. No, you're right. I should be more successful, but you know, I got to pay all these taxes and everything. I got to support you. Like, you know, you want to be an artist and play guitar all day and play video games. That's fine, but you're not going to have as much as me. And that's just the way it works.
Well, you know, and I'm looking at a place like New York.
Right. Oh yeah.
Now you got New York, and he's talking about coming up with these supermarkets. You know, like that.
Right.
But where is the money going
Right.
to come to set
Right.
up that supermarket? Or he's talking about free buses.
Well, and right. And so that was the interesting thing during this campaign is that the reporters would ask people, they said, well, what do you like about it? Well, the free buses. Well, who's going to pay for it? No, it's free. Didn't you hear?
Yes.
Well, no, somebody has to pay for that. And it's interesting when you look at even the history of New York. Do you remember, like, even with who am I thinking of? Cuomo. You know, these people were moving to Florida, and he said, that's fine. I don't need you. And then everybody moved to Florida. He said, come back. I'll make you dinner if you come back. I mean, because again, and it's the same thing we're seeing here in the region with Chicago is everything, you know, you can talk about the Bears later and things like that, is that we're talking about where we are in the region. Every community has doubled in size. And I say, people aren't moving from Illinois to Indiana because of the weather, right? It's for one reason. It's for taxes and, you know, all the things that go along with it. But I mean, New York's a perfect example of that, where this idea was, you know, it's funny because even now they claim he balanced the budget. He did it by, they're pushing back pensions. They're going to you know, underfund pensions, which is the same thing that got Chicago and Illinois in trouble. 50 years of not funding pensions.
Yep.
And you're basically creating a debt time bomb for the next person. And that's what happened in Illinois for 50 years. The joke I always say with Illinois was the politicians 50 years ago said, well, we can underfund the pension today and it'll be somebody else's problem, but a lot of those guys were still in office. And now it's their problem today, right? I mean, a lot of the guys like the Madigans, if you don't go to jail, you're still in office. So, I mean, that's the thing, is that they're claiming that you have a balanced budget because you're underfunding pensions, you're underfunding the future. Same thing with Social Security and anything else. So they're basically creating, again, because they have a fundamental misunderstanding, they say, well, I want it today. Don't worry about the future. I'm not going to be here.
I think we're talking about spenders.
Right.
You got spenders and you got producers.
Right.
But in order to spend, you've got to have the product. In order to get the product, you have to have the producer.
Right.
And so the producer is a guy like Elon, or a guy like Ken Griffith, who is just moved from New York down to Miami.
Well, remember, I was there in Chicago. So Ken Griffin had an office in Chicago.
Yes.
I worked with them I worked with their media team. So I was actually there. I was there the day that Ken Griffin said, hey, I can't keep people in Chicago. People are getting mugged and our taxes are going up. So we're leaving. And he said, okay, we're going to split time between New York and Miami. So I was there when Ken Griffin said, I'm out of Chicago. And now you've got Mamdani outside of his house in New York saying, attacking him for being wealthy. That's fine. I'll go to Miami. I'll go where I'm welcome. I'll take my money elsewhere. So, I mean, yeah, this is a guy who said, that's fine. I'll leave Chicago because, we don't want to pay the taxes. We don't feel safe here. He said, my employees don't feel safe in Chicago. We're leaving. And he did.
But there seems to be a contradiction, though, because these folks, they need the money. Where are they going to get the money from if they don't have the people to boot?
Right. Well, and that's the problem that you run into a lot of times. I mean, is that even this idea of building a factory, a lot of times I've heard this before about Indiana. There are people that want to locate factories here, a car manufacturer, for instance, and they say, everything's good. We know you'll give us good incentives. We know we've got cheap land here, but do you have the workforce? If I don't have a workforce, then that's not going to work for me, right? And this idea that we have so many people that are sort of underemployed, yet when they say, hey, we'll give you a factory job, they say, it's too much work. It's dirty. It's hot, so that's a lot of hours. I'd rather, again, go, go work at Walmart for the same amount of money. Why would I go, go work in a dirty factory?
Yeah.
So it's the same idea, is that, again, what does that do? That hurts the economy. If we can't build cars, if then that car dealer, that car company says, well, we could have located in Indiana, but there's not enough employees. We'll go somewhere. We'll go to Mexico or India or someplace where they'll jump all over each other to take our factory jobs.
Well, so then we've got another problem. Not only don't we have the producers, or we're discouraging the producers, but it seems as though we don't have the workers that are
Right.
so.
Because and I hear this all the time from small business owners. They say, even during COVID, a lot of my friends that were in small business, they say, I can't find help, but then also they're making more money staying home than working for me. Why would, and people would tell him, said, I can make more money staying home. And so they couldn't get employees. And I don't blame this. I could stay home, or I could go work for you and make the same amount of money, essentially. And again, that's where when we have a government that punishes the producers and rewards the people who aren't contributing, then you have a problem. You have an upside down society. And so that's sort of the thing, is at the end of the day, my small business is only as good as the employees I can keep to run it.
Yeah.
And if they're making more money staying home, well, and you see like California, they had the minimum wage laws. It's sort of a funny thing. I was reading about that recently, the idea that, the cost of living in California went up.
Yeah.
So their solution was raise minimum wages. Well, who did that hurt? That hurt the mom and pops. There are restaurants that just said, we're closed the day that minimum wage went into. They said, there's no way. Again, I'm a small business owner. I can tell you, my numbers. If tomorrow my wages doubled, I couldn't keep up with that. I couldn't make that balance out. And so who's benefiting? People like Walmart can afford that and can restructure. My mom and pop business can't, right? So again, you're hurting Main Street, in the process of, because you made things unaffordable. So your solution is to make things less affordable.
Yeah. No, I find that it's amazing to me that I'm thinking about California right now, where you have people right now who have very little, if nothing, and they're voting to continue to have nothing.
Right.
They're not. For example, I have a daughter who lives in California, and she lives near the Palisades.
Mm-hmm.
The Palisades burned to the ground, and yet the lady that was the mayor of the city was in Africa.
Karen Bass wasn't there, right? And everybody made excuses for her. And even now, I follow a guy, Adam Carolla, and he talks every week about, he said from the beginning, just the permitting process. And even now he does videos about the foundations. They used to use telephone poles, and now they have to replace it with caissons, several stories deep. So even just to rebuild your house is going to cost 10 times more because of the regulation.
Exactly.
I remember hearing stories of, I want to say it was like Suzanne Summers or some celebrity, that their house burned down a few years ago in one of the fires. They said it would take 10 years to get the permits to rebuild. We're just going to move to Utah or, someplace like that.
Yes.
They can afford to do that. The average person in California can't. And that's where, where that was the last mayor's race became that whole discussion about, the people that are living in their trailers, are they not? That whole thing with Spencer Pratt and this idea that, the people would rather have a Nithya Ram and somebody, again, that's basically like a Zoran Mandani. They'd rather have somebody like that's going to just have bigger government, instead of saying, look, this bigger government isn't working for me. This big California government isn't letting me rebuild my house. It's making things more unaffordable. So let's keep voting for that. I don't know how you justify that. Maybe just a fundamental misunderstanding of how things work.
But of course, you've got the producers who lived in the Palisades. They're leaving.
Right.
They're gone.
Because they know it's going to take 10 years to rebuild that house. So they're just going to leave.
At least a lot of people that say they're no longer able to rebuild. They just, it's too expensive.
Right.
Just can't do it. But so those were the people that were producing. Those were the people that were providing the income to the state.
Right.
They're gone. And you have the people that are using the income, or the people that are relying on money. They're voting.
Right.
And they're voting to continue to have people that are spenders rather than people that are producers.
Well, right. But there's also an interesting thing, and you can talk about with the United States and our border crisis, or even a place like California. If what happens in California is all of those homeless people came from somewhere. Many of those people just found their way to California because they knew it's sort of like coming to this country. If I can just make it, over the Rio Grande, or if you're Cuban, if I can just float to Florida, if I can get there, they're going to take care of me. And that was sort of the idea with all of these homeless people that are migrating to California, because you created such an incentive to do so. So if you live in a cold climate and you're homeless, like I just got to get enough bus money to get to California. It'll be warm, and they'll give me drugs, and they'll take care of me. Why not?
Well, it's funny. One of the things I was thinking about recently was Cuba.
Right.
Cuba.
Have you ever been?
No, I haven't.
So I spent a few days in Havana, maybe about 10 years ago. I was there right around the time. So, there was a time that Obama sort of opened the door. And then when Trump came, I was there when Trump sort of shut the door during his first term. And it was funny because a lot of the people I was there, we were there with like a kind of a diplomatic art, cultural exchange group. And, people were worried that Trump was going to close the door. We weren't going to be able to. I said, oh, darn, we'll be stuck in Havana for a couple months while we get this sorted out. And it's a beautiful country. And the people there were beautiful. They were fantastic. And my goal as an American, I literally, no joke, I brought a suitcase. I went to the dollar store because they said, bring Band-Aids, aspirin, pencils, all these little things that they don't have. I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bring a whole suitcase of that stuff and give it away. Then I had an empty suitcase to bring, rum and cigars back with. It just worked out that way. But again, beautiful people. And I would ask them, in a communist country, you got to be careful what you say. But I would ask people, I said, what do you want? What do you want? And one of the things, I would see these guys, I drove in, one of the old, one of the old Fords or Cadillacs and things like that. And I would see these guys grabbing hoses and fixing their, these 50-year-old, 60-year-old cars.
Yes.
And I would ask them, I said, what do you want? They said, you know what we want? We want Home Depot. We want an auto. He said, I'd love to have an auto zone in a Home Depot, but I don't want Walmart and Starbucks. They said, we want to have access to the resources, but we don't want to become America. We don't want to become, like every other community around. They don't want it to look like, I always joke around here, it's, Walmart next to Best Buy, next to Starbucks.
Sure.
They said, we want to be able to have, like he even said, if we needed nails for my house, you have to order them and wait months and months. They would love to just be able to go to Home Depot and grab those things, or go to AutoZone and grab parts for their car. But they also don't want Walmart, right? That was an interesting thing they said to me, is we want the big box stores, but we don't want the big box stores.
Well, here's having lived through that era, and yeah, I know if you ever saw The Godfather,
Oh yeah.
where they talked about him, but I can remember there was a guy by the name of Batista,
Right.
and Batista, he kind of ruled the country,
Mhm.
and it was a very corrupt country. The problem was it was a relatively successful country. They had casinos there, and the people were living relatively well down there.
Right.
Corrupt, but everybody was living relatively well. And of course, they got rid of him. And once they got rid of him, they came in with these new people. And it seems as though now they've got a lot of users. There's a lot of people that
Right.
need, but there's no producers.
Right. And that's the problem. And I was trying to think of, Meyer Lansky. So even, look at Meyer Lansky and what they did. And it's always interesting to see a place that's frozen in time when capitalism stopped.
Yeah.
And so and this is a whole nother sidebar discussion about the mafia, but had Castro not come along when he did, Cuba would have been Las Vegas East.
Yes.
It would have been it would look like Las Vegas. I mean, people would, the East Coast would have gone there. They would have spent their money there. Had Castro not stopped that, and again, you can argue whether it was a good thing or bad thing, the mafia would have grown Havana the way they grew Las Vegas, and they would have been a much more prosperous people right now. But when you go there, what you see, even I would ask them about, I said, are things really as bad as we hear? And this was, again, years ago, before things have gotten even worse. And they would say the way it works is we go to the grocery store on Tuesday, and whatever shows up, maybe it's sugar, maybe it's right, whatever shows up, we buy it, and that's it. When I got there, I bought a new camera and all this stuff. I was going to take pictures. I got there and I realized I forgot a 9-volt battery. And I said, finding a 9-volt battery in Havana is like trying to find a flux capacitor in the Old West. It was literally like, people were looking at me like, what's a 9-volt? I finally, because what's interesting is there's a lot of, You know, we know that the Russians, you know, there's a lot of investment there, but also a lot of Mexico and a lot of Japanese. So the Japanese have high-end hotels and things like that. So I just happened to stumble upon like a Japanese Office Depot in the hotel, and they just happened to have a 9-volt battery that I paid, you know, $15 for or something, but I
Yeah,
needed it.
yes.
But I mean, that's the kind of thing. It's like, I need a 9-volt battery to power my camera. Everybody just looked at me. No, good luck, sir. Because that's the thing. We get so used to it. I can just I can run to any little corner gas station and get a 9-volt battery here. But for them, those things are just unobtainable luxuries.
Yeah. So I suppose that I guess it brings us back to the idea of hey, you just need the producers. You need
Right.
people. You need the work. You need the workers, of course, but you really, if you don't have the people, if you don't have the people that are running the engine, then you don't have anybody that's going to be able to operate the engine.
Right.
You've got to have the Elon Musks. You've got to have the Rockefellers. You've got to have these. If you don't have these people, those you know, they had a series not too long ago about the men who made America.
Right. Well, what's interesting about that is it's funny. I watched that as well, and I was thinking about Andrew Carnegie
Yeah.
and Rockefeller, and I always tell people from the region, I said, you know, they demonize them, but if it for me personally, if it wasn't for Rockefeller and Carnegie, I wouldn't be here. My family wouldn't have come here. Most of the people
Yes.
here in the region today, our grandparents or whomever, wouldn't have come here
No.
if it wouldn't have been. So I literally owe my life to Rockefeller and Carnegie. One grandfather came for the mill, one came for the refinery,
Yes,
right?
yes, yes.
And we don't appreciate that.
Yeah.
They were demonized in their day, and they basically it became a competition. Who could build the most libraries? Who could
Yeah.
who could build the most stuff? Because they were demonized in their day for being wealthy as well. So it's an interesting thing when you look at it. Like, this is nothing new, this demonization of the wealthy. You know, the only difference is they decided they were going to just, like, we'll just spend our money, we'll build libraries. And, you know, you to this day, you go to older libraries, it still says, you know, Carnegie on the door,
Sure.
on over the door.
Sure. Most of your great institutions, most of your great universities,
Right.
they've all been endowed with these extremely wealthy people.
Right.
They made the country, really. And so, you know, as much as there is a natural resentment with everybody. You know, I'll see somebody that went to school the same time I did, and the guy's making millions and millions of dollars.
Right.
And so you resent that. I mean, it's just kind of natural. There's a natural jealousy that's in people. It's just there. But of course, you got to overcome that. You've got to overcome your jealousy to see the good that's being done by some of these folks.
Oh, hey, look, you were on a bunch of billboards. You did pretty well for yourself. I still see your face on a billboard occasionally when I'm driving around. So you did well for yourself today.
Yeah, no, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. No,
I mean, you got $100,000 house, and the guy next to you got $1 million house.
Right.
Why the hell? And it's
Right.
just, and so if you don't have something, you want something, but you don't necessarily want to do what's necessary to get that something, but you want it.
Right.
Yeah, want it. And so, and I think that's what's happening a lot of times. And a lot of times, people just simply do not appreciate what it takes to get that something. They just don't understand what the steps are.
Right.
So you'll see a guy like Elon Musk and you say, look at that guy, he's got all that money. Yeah, he's got all the money, but how did he get the money? Well, they really don't think that far back. They just know that he's got the money and they want some of that money and they want some of the things that man has. But if it wasn't for Elon, then all the jobs that he's created, all the thousands and not hundreds, but thousands of jobs that he's created. If it's not people that are working at Tesla, if it's not people working for these computer companies, it's not people working for SpaceX, if it's not for, you know, he's created thousands and thousands of jobs.
Right.
And so, you know, he is a producer, but people still resent him for whatever reason, even though in fact, they're taking money that he's producing.
Right. They're benefiting.
They're taking the money, but they resent it.
Well, even the idea of Tesla, one of the things I've talked about with Tesla is we have somewhere between 40 and 60,000 people die every year in car accidents. Imagine if Tesla, and I don't know if you've ever driven one. I've driven in one. I've used self-driving. I mean, imagine if that technology saves thousands of people every year. Very well could. I mean, that technology, that self-driving technology can save thousands of people. You know, the tunnels could potentially be a game changer in congestion in major cities. So it's not like he's doing bad things. It's not,
No.
you know, he's doing things that could potentially save thousands of lives every year, and they still hate him for it.
Yes, although that's kind of scary, and it's another thing. It's very scary because my kids live in California, but you have these self-driving cars delivering pizzas.
Right.
You know, and so there's no doubt that it's going to come to a point that these self-driving cars are going to prevent a lot of accidents because everybody's going to be in a self-driving car and they're all going to be controlled one way or another.
Right.
But and which is a great thing. But in some respects, it's not a great thing. I mean, you know, what are you doing? You're not driving the car. What are you doing? Are you just sitting in a vehicle, being taken somewhere to? You know, that's another story. But it is kind of a scary thing. So
Well, it is, but also, like I said, when you have tens of thousands of people dying every year, if we have a technology, it's just sort of like, you know, if you look at how commercial air travel has gotten so safe. I mean, the same idea, and that's what they're talking about with cars, is we almost need to treat cars like we treat air travel. Everybody's got a transponder and we keep them apart. But I mean, that's the thing, is that we have a problem. It's one of the leading causes of death in this country.
Yeah.
And if we could fix that, if we can save a few thousand people a year because of self-driving, great.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, I think that's a great thing.
yeah, no, and I don't know how many people are going to. There are going to be those people that are going to be resist the fact.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, he's done some great things. There's no doubt about it. And so I guess we wind up. We still have that basic tension between those who make things and those who use things.
Right.
And the users are, I suppose, there's a reason why they call them users. But there's a reason why. There's simply a reason why people that take the advantage of the producers. They resent it for one reason. It's sort of like, I don't know why that is, but you know, somebody gives you some money. There's a way you resent it in a way.
Right.
You resent it. It's like
Right.
welfare. People they resent it. They're being given something, but they resent it, and there's sort of and of course, you know, you're not producing anything, you're not making anything, you're just taking something. But I don't know what it is that causes that, but you know, I guess it's the dependency.
Well, also, I mean, at the end of the day, man needs purpose, right? And I think that's a lot of what we've taken away. I always talk about, I said, you know, our ancestors spent their life hunting and gathering,
Yep.
you know, running from, you know, bears and mountain lions. And I mean, every day, you know, just even, you know, a sprain or a cut can be fatal. And so they spent their whole lives just surviving. And now, again, you know, I can pick up my phone and have a pizza here in 10 minutes. I can have everything. Amazon can be here in an hour. I have no, you know, I have no need or want. And so we've lost purpose. We've gone so quickly from in a few generations, even again, going back to the old West, you know, people that were struggling to, you know, in wagon trains and building farms just to survive. And now I can, on my phone, I can get whatever I want,
Yes.
you know? And now what people are still looking for purpose.
Yeah. Well, I always talk about the people that came from the east and went to the west.
Mhm.
They traveled on these covered wagons,
Mhm.
and during the trip, people died.
Mhm.
They got injured. They had to do crazy things like
The Donner Party, yeah.
yeah. And so, you know, and so I wondered today, you know, if gas prices go up 50 cents, you know, we all get into a tizzy.
Right.
You know, yet I think they talked about this. They say the worst, the people that are in the bottom, say 10% of this country, economically, they probably live better than 90% of the world.
They live better than a king did several hundred years ago,
Yeah.
right? They had more, you have more stuff. You have
Yes.
you know, even the poorest, we have a smartphone, you have a TV, you have air conditioning, you live better than, you know, everybody did several hundred years ago.
Yes.
And so, I mean, again, and I would say that's capitalism in a nutshell, right? I mean, again, it's hard for me having been to, you know, a communist country and seeing how that works. And again, the same idea that people want to say, well, it's America's fault that Cuba isn't, well, everybody else doesn't have that same embargo. You know, everybody else, Mexico, Japan, all these people were doing business with Cuba. So, I mean, this idea that you can't blame America, you can for the oil embargo, obviously, more recently. But again, when you go to a communist country and you see how little they have because there's no incentive to produce. I mean, even those stories about, why would I grow an orange tree if government's going to take 90% of my,
Yes.
like I grow grapes in my house. I spent 5 years getting them to the point where I can start cultivating the grapes. Why would I do that if government's going to come in and take 90% of that? I
Yeah.
mean, again, that's a fundamental ideology that you can't really argue with. Why would I invest so much time into anything if government's just going to take it from me?
Well, actually, isn't that a good example of the brain drain?
Right.
All the really intellectuals in that country, the people that were making things, the people that had things, they all got out of the country. They moved to Miami, and you've got people. You got Cuban Americans like Ted Cruz or so it just doesn't work when you don't have producers. It just doesn't work.
Well, I mean, do you remember the story of Atlas Shrugged and John Galt?
Yes,
I
yes.
still wear a John Galt hat when I go out, and people call me. They say, "Oh, are you John?" I go, "I got to tell you about Atlas Shrugged
Yeah.
because that's exactly what's happening. Is
Yeah.
we are seeing that right now. If you're going to demonize the inventors and the producers, you're going to have an Atlas Shrugged situation. That's what Chicago's going through. That's what New York's going through. You're going to have an Atlas Shrugged situation where all the producers say, you know what, we're out.
Yeah, I used to read all Ayn Rand when I was a teenager. I read all of her
Yeah.
books. Yeah, and of course, what she said is absolutely correct. I mean, it's not real. It's not real complicated.
No.
It's Animal Farm. I mean, it's not real complicated.
Right.
It's-
But that's the interesting thing is that's one of the things that I get to on the radio is why, and this is one of the interesting things that for me has evolved is I started off in radio blaming the politicians. I used to blame them, and now I've come to realize, well, we're the ones that voted for them, and you're the ones that keep voting for them.
yes.
So like for me, I always say, my goal on radio isn't to change somebody's mind. My goal is to give them more information so maybe they'll change their mind on their own, right? Because I think a lot of people, when you talk about the left-right politics, they're getting half the story. So, I mean, any of these things that are going on locally, we can, why talk about the train and the bears and all these billion-dollar projects is my goal was to educate people about what's happening so that they can say, well, wait a second, maybe I don't want to support the people that keep putting these projects on us and putting that liability on us.
Yeah. I hear you.
And now your producer is going to put the hand. I guess it's a good time to switch gears. You want to talk about some local things and talk about the human bears?
Bears. Well, I tend to be in favor. I know you're a little bit of the other ilk. So maybe you could tell us what it is that you think is a bad thing about that.
Well, and so here's, so again, I'm fortunate enough with local radio. I have the lieutenant governor on quite a bit. And again, he's, a Republican and locally have a lot of Democrats and both sides are in favor of this project. But one of the things I've asked him, and I always ask the local elected officials, I say, could I get the same deal the Bears are getting? And they always this idea that government's picking and choosing the winners and the losers. Like if you and I started our own widget factory, I said, well, here's the deal, guys. I want you to build my factory. I want to pay no taxes for 30 years. I'm going to create the same number of jobs that the Hammond Bears are going to create, but I want the same deal that they're going to get. You'd laugh me out of your office. They'd say, no way, we're not going to give you that deal. Nobody gets that deal. Unless you're the Bears. And that becomes the question is like this idea of that government is building these billion-dollar facilities. They just got done building one in Las Vegas and this idea of subsidies. And I say, why is it the right of government to pick and choose winners that way? My small business will be negatively affected by the stadium because it will affect traffic in the area. There are people that could potentially lose their homes. There are people that will lose their businesses. So again, this idea for me is that government does not take the idea of picking and choosing. They don't take that idea. They take it very lightly, and it's sort of like, oh, we're going to do this. We're going to raise a food and beverage tax. We're going to do these things. And there's not going to be a discussion. This is what we're doing because you elected us to do this.
Well, sometimes nothing is all that obvious. I'll go back a ways. When I used to work for the federal government many years ago, I used to go to Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to Indianapolis, they used to call it Naptown.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a bunch of old buildings, old buildings. There was really no hotels to speak of. I stayed at one of the hotels, the Hilton. It was the big hotel down there. It has since been bought and rebought, but anyway, it was a very sleepy town, very very sleepy town. Nothing was going on there. They had old buildings down there around the center of the town, and there was this guy Luger,
Mm-hmm.
and Luger was, at that time, he became the senator, but at that time he was the mayor. And he had this crazy idea, and he had all these critics against him. He said, we're going to build the RCA Center.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, RCA Center? You must be crazy. We've got this sleepy old town, and we can't afford it, and nobody's going to come to see it. And, well, of course, the RCA has been built, and since that time, it's been knocked down 2 or 3 other places that have been built. You've got
And you paid for every one of them. You paid for RCA, you paid for Lucas. We're still paying for Lucas. We're going to pay for the Bears. So, I mean, again, that becomes the question is the idea that here in the region, we're going to have a food and beverage tax to pay for it. We're going to have potentially other taxes involved. And that becomes the question is, did we agree to this? And again, that's sort of always my question is, do the people want these things? We just finished $1 billion train project where we have never ending projects at the Gary Airport. And that's always the question is, we were joking the other day about obviously the Gary Airport's proximity to this new potential stadium. I said, the Buffalo Bills are going to get to use this Gary Airport more than I am, and I'm the one that paid for it, right? I mean, they promised us 5 airlines if we extended the runway, and there's never ending. We're going to extend the tarmac. We're going to build the tower. I mean, there's never ending projects there. I still haven't gotten to use it as a passenger, right? So, I mean, that's sort of the thing. It's the same with the train is that you're spending $1 billion for a few thousand people. Does it have the benefit that it needs to? And the same thing with the stadium. And I mean, that's the fundamental question. And again, whether I'm against it or for it or not, but the fundamental question is, I was joking with you earlier that they promised us the place would get used 365 days a year. Taylor Swift, she's already booked and coming to town.
Yes.
I mean, and that's the kind of thing. If you're going to do something like this, be realistic. And I just realized the other day we're going to build a stadium. We're still talking about spending $300 million building a convention center right down the highway from the stadium in Gary. So now I'm thinking, why do we need both? Why are we going to spend $300 million on this place and $1 billion on that place? Why, or is anybody talking about putting them together? Would that make more sense? Do we have the demand? Do we have the need for those things? Right. I mean, that's sort of the thing is, everybody we always call it the stakeholders. And it always seems like the stakeholders, the politicians are not the people who are affected by it. They're not the ones who get the traffic. They're not the ones who lose their homes over it, but they call themselves the stakeholders. Right. And that's sort of the question is, I think the people are especially growing up here, we're so used to, again, we a place of corruption, dozens of elected officials go to jail.
Yep.
We see Chicago with all the corruption there. It's never ending corruption. We just sort of get used to that corruption. And a lot of people just sort of get this idea in their head that, their vote doesn't matter. Nothing they can do matters. And then what happens? Now we have 15% voter turnout in the primaries, right? Nobody's showing up to vote anymore because they think it's a wasted effort. And so I don't know how, what do we do about those people that just say, I'm not going to bother to vote. I'm not a Democrat or Republican. I just feel like, nothing I do matters because they're just going to do what they want.
Well, I guess the question is, looking back to Indianapolis, is Indianapolis better than it was 40 years ago?
Right.
Have businesses relocated there? Have insurance companies relocated there? Eli Lilly.
Well, again, Eli Lilly didn't come there. They said, well, the RCA dome's here now. They came for the tax incentives. They came for, I mean, I have family that works at Lilly and worked at Pfizer, and they didn't come because of the RCA dome. They came because they saw the opportunity. I mean, that was sort of the thing is they saw the opportunity. Pfizer built pharmaceutical plants all over the central Indiana, Terre Haute, places like that. So again, I think at the end of the day, so think about where I'm at with this is the idea that we brought all of this development in because of the tax incentives.
Yes.
But now we're going to raise taxes, right? So, I mean, it's sort of that idea of, and what I was telling you earlier was this idea that, are we, as a state, are we really doing that well, or are we just that much less dysfunctional than our neighbor Illinois? And we look at it and go, well, look how dysfunctional they are. Well, that's you still could do better,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's sort of the thing. This idea of we know why everybody moved here. It's because of the taxes, and yet we're raising taxes, right? I mean, everything's going up in cost. So it seems like we're going to stifle future growth to spend money on the bears and trains and things like that.
Yeah, well, it's really, in some respects, we being from Indiana, we're happy to see these people come from Illinois, but it's really kind of a sad thing because Chicago was at one time one of the greatest cities in the world.
Right.
One, and so you hate to see the thing going downhill, but it is going downhill, and so there's not much that we can do about it. But of course. I think that if people are coming here, perhaps we can make the place a little bit better than it has been. I mean, places, I'm kind of analogizing it back to Indianapolis. The place has been sleepy for a very long time. We've had a number of companies basically leave our area. We've had, we used to have candy companies, they're gone. I don't know about Amazo, I think it's gone. I think we used to have manufacturing facilities in Hammond. They're all gone.
Right. Well, but even in Chicago, I tell people all the time, I said, if you go to an antique store,
Yes.
everything was made in Chicago. Every nut and bolt, toilet, everything. Chicago was then what China is today. So many things were made in little factories on the south side and the west side of Chicago. And then I often wonder, all of that manufacturing has gone away. Where did those people go? Obviously, a lot of them moved to the suburbs. A lot of them moved here, but all those good jobs went away. And you can say, was it because, we created a global economy and it was cheaper to make it in China? Or was it because Chicago chased those people out? I talk to people all the time in Chicago that are still there. And I say, are you looking at moving to the suburbs? Are you looking at moving to Indiana? They talk about opportunity costs and things like that. There's a lot of people that aren't going to leave, but at a certain point, it's going to the problem is you've gone 50 years without a plan. And even now they just passed a $56 billion budget. They're taxing everything that moves. Everything is about more programs. There's nothing to, again, going back to the incentivizing the producers, everything is about creating more programs and not doing anything. You're just going to continue to tax people out of the market. And so they have no plan for the future to fix things. Their only plans are tax more and put less money into the pensions, which is going to continue to blow up in the future.
Yeah.
So there's no plan. So, again, that's, our communities in Indiana continue to double in size because there's no plan in Illinois.
Yeah. Well, but you don't see that there's going to be some, in a similar respect, you don't see that there's going to be growth around the Bears having the stadium here. You don't see that new businesses are going to relocate here, new restaurants are going to come into the area. That you don't see that.
No, I absolutely see it. I'm going to be priced out of the market is what I see. My small business will be priced out of the market like a lot of other small businesses. But here's the thing to remember. One of the things that I keep talking about is the idea that the Bears aren't building a stadium in the middle of a neighborhood. They are building a campus with the intention of you going to the campus. The hotel will be there.
Yes.
The restaurants will be there. The entertainment will be there. The goal it's not like going to Wrigley where you take the train and you go to the local bank. But even look at Wrigley. Look at what happened when the Ricketts came in. What did they do to Wrigleyville? So same idea. We're not building, and even now there's nothing in that neighborhood that you can walk to from the stadium. So this idea, maybe it will develop, but the goal, is it going to benefit my friends, the local small business owners? But even I use the example of what if it did? What if on a Sunday, 20,000 cars decide to go to Whiting to get lunch before the game? What's going to happen? That little sleepy town. I've been there during parades. I've been there when Lil Wayne was playing at the Pavilion and 20,000 people came to town and it was gridlock. So this is a thing, if you're going to do something where 70,000 people are going to come to a little neighborhood not designed for 70,000 people, that's a fundamental, and I hate using that word transformational. You're going to have to transform that community to accommodate that traffic. And again, the people that have lived in those towns like Hammond and Robertsdale and Whiting, do those old folks, is that what they want for their community? They're going to get pushed out. So all the people that built that community, they're going to, that first Sunday of 20,000 cars driving through Robertsdale and Whiting, they go, I'm out of here. So they're the ones that are going to get pushed out because oh, this is not what I want. This is not the little sleepy community that Whiting used to be or North Hammond used to be. And they're all going to leave. It's going to fundamentally change the way that community, and maybe it's a good thing, but maybe for them, it's not a good thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, but weren't those communities, weren't they a result of the mills and the refineries? In other words, these people were not going to Robertsdale, or people were not going to Hesville, saying, really like to go to Hesville, that's the place to be. They worked at a place like United States, they worked at a place like Inland Steel,
Right.
and they needed a place to live. So they needed a place that was somewhat affordable, and they moved to Hesville.
Well, that's the interesting thing, though. A lot of the guys that I meet that work at the refinery and work at the mills, they don't live in those neighborhoods anymore.
No.
They've moved farther south because they
Yes.
make a good living, so they can afford to live. So now you have a situation where, you know, the people living next to the refinery aren't the ones that benefit from the refinery. They're the ones that have to deal with the smells and the flares and
Yes.
you know, all the risk. But the people that work there live a couple towns over. So again, same idea. I agree. Those were the company towns, Marktown, places like that. But the people don't live there anymore. They've moved further south. They moved far away from their job. So
Yes. Yeah. No. Well, that's another story. But one of the things that's kind of bothered me is that the cities, that we don't have a city we don't have cities any longer, and there's an allure to the city. There's an allure to a place like Chicago. I mean, it was vibrant. I used to work down there for years. And
right.
I love going.
I mean, again, that's the thing. I'm downtown now. I walk out of work some days on a summer day. So what a beautiful place. But I wouldn't bring my kids here. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't bring my kids back here. I wouldn't put them on a train and come back here and walk around. I mean, that's the thing. It's a beautiful city, and the people are great. But again, it's just I wouldn't come back. I wouldn't go out of my way to spend money there, right? And I don't think a lot of people are going to do that anymore. The idea of taking the train downtown to go buy a new hat, you know, walking downtown, those days are over, right? I mean, we've all gone through several generations now. We've gone from the downtown to the mall to the Walmart to now the Amazon. Now people don't even leave their house, grab Amazon, and I don't need to take the train downtown and go buy some new shoes. I can push a button, Amazon will bring them 2 hours later.
Exactly.
So, I mean, again, that becomes a question about what's the purpose of a downtown, right? I mean, we've seen,
Yes.
you know, if you've been down there, I was down there during COVID where, I mean, literally we went from COVID where it was a ghost town to being boarded up because of the, you know, the political turmoil. There were times because I work not too far from where they had the Democratic convention, and they said, you know what, we're just all going to stay home that week. And I was downtown. They had everything boarded up because they were worried about the violence.
Sure.
And it's a sad thing to see. You know, I work in Greektown. It's a sad thing to see the whole place was boarded up. And how did that affect business? They thought they were going to get all this business from the Democratic convention. Instead, they boarded it up and closed it down. They created an exclusion zone and nobody could go there and spend money. So, I mean, again, you know.
Well, the other thing which is sadder, I suppose, is something like downtown Hammond.
Right. But again, that's the interesting idea, though, is downtown Hammond. They've spent $300 million recently renovating downtown Hammond. And so there's this idea that the people are going to come back. We're going to build condos. And again, they've had several, it's always one of the things, if you've been around long enough, I remember when they built the federal building downtown.
Yeah.
All those things came to downtown.
Yes.
We keep trying over and over again. Now they've renovated downtown. They've made 2 lanes into 1, and they put all this parking and bike trails and all these things. They just continue to try to reinvent it. It's not working. At a certain point, you say, this isn't going to work.
That's not going to be what it was.
Right.
No, I think if it's reimagined, it may end up being something which is feasible and smaller, but it's going to be a lot smaller in scale, and it's never going to be what it was.
Well, this is the thing, is that what I always talk about is people your age, you remember a downtown Hammond, you remember a downtown Gary. I grew up in the back end of that where that area was already run down. So I don't have that sort of romantic
yes.
memories of sort of like the beginning of a Christmas Story where everybody went downtown and looked in the windows. We never had that experience. We went to the mall and then we went to Walmart. So again, you know, for your generation, I can see, again, this idea, we'd love to bring back the downtown and have it be what it was, and like in Christmas Story. It's not going to happen.
No.
You know, right? I mean, that's the thing, is like, how much do you want to spend for it not to happen? That's the question.
No, it's not going to happen. I mean, but talking about being old, I can remember Gary.
Right.
I remember Broadway, going
Yeah.
down Broadway.
and people from my generation don't remember that. I remember it as being that rundown city.
Yes.
So we don't have, I mean, even these people that try to save the old drive-in or save the old movie theater, like we don't have those memories. We don't have those romantic, memories of these things because people want to save things. Well, I had my first date there. Well, you could spend all the money in the world. Nobody's going to use it. Right. I mean, that's the thing is, that my generation didn't have those memories. We don't have those ties to the downtown. I mean, it was a magical place. I get it. Even East Chicago, you ride the trolley downtown and go look in the windows. We don't have those memories.
No, absolutely not. I guess though, what I say about it's going to be different and reimagined. We no longer have Gimbals. We no longer have pennies. We know a
Right.
number, but we do have Macy's. We do have Macy's.
Yeah.
And they say Macy's is doing quite well right now, doing very well. So it's kind of like reimagining. It's going to get smaller. Some of the stuff is going to remain, but it's going to be smaller. And like downtown Hammond, like you were saying, downtown Hammond it's never going to be what it was. It's going to be a small downtown. That's basically what it's going to be.
Right.
And yeah.
So, I mean, again, that's sort of the idea is that, the question that I ask on the radio is always this idea of I was around, you've tried several times to jumpstart downtown Hammond. There's always talk about Gary and places like that. We're going to do all these things. And I never see the follow through. I always see the money get spent. We're going to spend all this money.
Yes.
And then I never see the follow through. Going back to the Gary Airport, going back to the train, any of these projects that you've been around long enough, we see, okay, this is going to be, as I always joke, the transformational. The more times I hear the word transformational on a project, the more worried I get because I know how expensive it's going to be. And that becomes a question. We never have that follow up. We just sort of go, okay, we're going to do this thing. Okay, it didn't work. On to the next thing. The airport didn't work. Onto the train. The train didn't work. Onto the convention center. The convention center didn't work. Onto the Bear Stadium. But again, who benefits? The politicians, the consultants, the people on the inside. They get the contracts. They get the jobs. And then who suffers on the back end? The rest of the community suffers. We don't get the benefits that we were promised. We were promised Taylor Swift, and she never comes to town.
Yeah. So what happens to a place like Hammond? I mean, what happens to it? Does it just get smaller? Does it just fade away?
Hammond's growing. I mean, Hammond overtook Gary a few years ago in population. So again, it's one of those things where I always say for the region, all we have to do is just put the giant catcher's mitt out and catch all the Chicago business when they finally realize it. But again, if we make it less, if we keep raising taxes, we make it less attractive for people to move here. Or they'll just skip over us. And they'll say, I'm going to skip over that county with all the taxes. I'm going to skip over and go to Porter County. I'm going to go to the next county over that doesn't have the taxes. So, I mean, again, that's the question.
In real estate taxes, aren't we relatively pretty competitive in real estate taxes?
We are relatively low. I mean, but again, you're looking at our dysfunctional neighbor next door that has the highest property taxes tied with New Jersey in the country.
Yes.
So again, we're relatively low. We're not as dysfunctional as our neighbor, but also, we had this SB1, our tax restructuring. You have multiple never-ending referendums, school referendums, and I mean all these extra costs. So that's sort of what I used to call it, the voodoo economics of it. We can say we have a 1% property tax, but my 1% after all the referendums and all the other things is actually 2%, right? Yeah. And so now we've got all these unfunded liabilities. We're going to have the Bear Stadium, we've got the train, we've got all these things coming in. So we can say, well, I've got a 2% property tax, but I mean, even here in Indiana, our gas taxes became some of the highest in the country. So, if you have that shell game of, well, hey, we have low taxes, but you're still building big things. I always talk about like the state of Indiana. We build $30 million rest stops. You know what I mean? Like this idea, how am I spending $30 million on a rest stop when the state should just say, okay, Hardee's, Buc-ee's, Starbucks, McDonald's, here's the land. You guys build just like Ohio does. Why am I building these things? Why am I spending hundreds of millions of dollars on rest stops when the private sector would be glad to take on that project? And that's the thing is that even going back to the Bear Stadium, were we too generous with that deal? And this is what I had this discussion with Lieutenant Governor. I said, if we are such a business friendly state, the tax incentives of the Bears moving to Indiana, that tens of millions of dollars, should have been enough incentive for them to move here. You didn't have to offer them an extra $1 billion. And that was my argument were we being, we approved that deal in an hour downstate. I mean, again, and everybody jumped at it. And that's always the question is, are you being too generous with them? And I know as a business owner, I couldn't get that same deal.
Well, that's true. What about Arlington Heights? I mean, Arlington Heights, they were, how much money did they pay for the real estate?
Hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yes, hundreds of millions.
And the local communities were all in on helping them develop that. It was a weird thing that, again, a state with a $56 billion budget, they throw billions of dollars like it's nothing. All of a sudden, this one thing that they decided, this is the one thing the one time Illinois is going to be fiscally conservative.
Yes.
It's for the Bears. But again, it's an interesting thing because you have, J.B. Pritzker has his eyes set on the White House. This is not gonna work well for him when he goes, the idea of losing your crown jewel, the Chicago Bears, to a red state. That's going to be tough for him. That's going to be an issue during the debates for him, right? That's going to be how do you justify, your political ideology if you're losing businesses, you're losing population, you're losing the Bears? How do you justify your political ideology if by all accounts you're losing everything in the process?
Yes. Well, the problem with that is you assume that people are rational.
And that goes to the crux of the issue, right? We're again, I'm an analytical engineer. I consider everything I make, I'm a black and white guy. And so that's one of the interesting things about what I do is I'm up against an irrational world. I'm trying to make rational arguments in an irrational emotional world. I mean, and again, going back to like the Zoran Mondanis, everything's free childcare. It's for everything. Every tax increase that I've ever seen, every program is for the children. It's for safety. It's, it uses buzzwords. And that's the thing as an analytical person, I say, no, that doesn't make sense. But I'm, again, I get demonized for saying, no, that doesn't make sense because it's emotional arguments. How do you pay for something it's free? It's free. No, it's not free. That's not how it works.
That's the question. How do you pay for it?
Right. But that's always for me, again, at the end of the day, being my foundation is I try to be grounded in facts. Again, even like talking about the debt, $39 trillion. I don't go a single podcast or radio show without mentioning the debt, because to me, that's the biggest issue that nobody's talking about. And again, this idea that literally neither side talks about it. Neither side, they've basically decided it's such an insurmountable issue. We're just going to pretend, we're just ignore it. And none of the politicians that you're going to elect even want to talk about it. They want to talk about spending more money and more programs and spending more on the military and spending more on this and spending. If you're the one guy that goes to Washington and says, you know what, maybe we should start looking at cutting, you don't last long. I mean, you look at Thomas Massey, you look at Rand Paul, even John Fetterman. I mean, again, the guy came to Washington and said, hey, maybe we need to put the brakes on some of these things. Now his party hates him. He went from a darling of the left, and now he's hated, and they want to run him out of town and primary him out because he said, you know what, I'm going to vote my conscience and not my emotions. I'm not going to vote with my party, and they hate him for it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you, again, you come back to the point that you've got to make the money. You've got to make the money in order to spend it. And if you don't, and so we don't have the money and we're spending it nonetheless. That's why we got the debt. Right.
Well, and that becomes an interesting thing is even, the idea of, again, I'm getting older, you're older. At a certain point, you start thinking about the future. It's, I'm good. I've got a nice house. I'm good. And my son just turned 18 and now we're, doing financial planning for him and planning his future. And, I've got a daughter. So it's like one of those things at a certain point you say, okay, it's not about me. I'm good. I'm comfortable. This is my life. I'm good. I'm going to enjoy the rest of my life. And then, but so many people they don't think about that. They're not thinking about like that Social Security. Well, whenever I talk about Social Security, people always say, well, I paid into it. I want mine. And they don't talk about the next generation who's going to pay into it and not get anything.
Yes.
When we were financial planning for my son, I said, your generation needs to plan on a scenario where you're going to be putting into a system that you're never going to get a benefit from.
Yes. That I'm not sure. That is the only really social program that I'm very much in favor of. And I say that because I think to myself, I don't think it's the government's job to take care of you. Unfortunately, with half of our population, if they're not taken care of, it's going to be worse. So I think that if we did not have Social Security, we would probably have half of our half of our senior citizens out there on the street.
Well, but the other interesting thing is I recently went through this with a friend of mine who was incapacitated, and I basically took over. I became his POA and took care of his affairs. When I tried to get him services, I tried to get him state services because he was bedridden. I tried to get him
Yes.
this. They said, get on the waiting list, get on the waiver. I said, here's a guy who paid into the system
Yes.
for 50 years.
Yes.
From since he was a teenager, he paid his taxes. He he was, again, just like a lot of people, he spent his whole life paying his taxes, was a good taxpayer, did his job, did his part, was a producer. And then when it came time for him, he needed help. They said, get on the waiting list.
Yes.
Come back next week. Keep filling out forms. Sorry, there's nothing for you.
No, that's right.
And that's the frustrating thing is, I mean, again, like it's one thing to pay into a system and get the benefit back out of it. There's people that today they say, you might pay millions of dollars into the Social Security system and you may get thousands back.
Yes.
And there's people that have never paid into the system that are bad. So again, it's one of those things where, yeah, you're right. It's a great program, but it's fundamentally flawed. It's fundamentally a pyramid scheme. And now it's upside down. I think we're down to, at one point it was like 8 people working for everybody on Social Security. Now it's down to like 2 or 3.
Yes. No,
So
you're
it's
right.
unsustainable. But again, I'm that too. I'm that guy.
Yes.
It's great if you're the one, if you're the guy benefiting. I'm the two. I'm the one who's paying into the system. I'm never going to see. I mean, that's the problem is, if you're the guy whose back it's on, you say, well, that's not fair.
Yeah, no, I think you'll see it. The question is, will your son see it?
Right.
But again, let's take let's look at it the other way. Suppose we didn't have Social Security, and you say, well, everybody here's got to get a 401k plan. And most people, they get paid the money, and they spend the money every week.
Right.
That's the way they do it. And so they turn 65, they turn 70, whenever they're going to retire, whenever they stop working, they have no money.
Well, and you see these stories about the 100-year-old guy that's still, working at the grocery store or something like that. And again, it's one of those, but what responsibility do I have for that person who made bad decisions? I mean, and again, some people struggle. Some people have medical issues. And again, that becomes a question is what is the role of government? What is that the role of government? Are we getting into territory that's not in, again, it's a discussion about the constitutionality of all these programs. Even remember when Biden tried to bail out everybody, their college, and they said it was unconstitutional. So I don't care if it's unconstitutional. We're doing it anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I know. I agree with you. I agree with what you're saying, in principle. But just assume that tomorrow, 50% of the seniors no longer have Social Security,
Right.
and they're out there on the street. Who's going to end up paying for those people out there on the street?
But I'm saying that the system from the beginning was fundamentally flawed.
Yes.
I mean, that's the problem is that everything, this is the thing about government. Government does a great job of growing. They don't know how to retract. Even going back to look at what Gary's going through a place like that, government doesn't know how to shrink. They only know how to grow. Government inherently grows. And when you say, no, you're not, when we put the brakes on the growth or we even have negative growth, they don't know what to do. And that's the problem we're seeing now is you had decades of population growth,
Yep.
baby boomers, all those things. And now the next generations aren't growing. And, you get that tipping point. At a certain point, you get too old to have kids, right? I mean, that's a fundamental, that's a law of nature. And so that becomes the question is that, when you have a system that's fundamentally flawed, there's no way to fix that. When you have a system that goes from 8 people funding one person and now to 2, I mean, the system was eventually going to implode on itself. But nobody for the last 50 years has wanted to talk about it because if you dare come after my Social Security, we're gonna run you out of town, right? I mean, that's the thing. Everybody's afraid.
Yes.
So we have this sword of Damocles hanging over us. We know someday it's going to run out of money. But we're all afraid to deal with it, just like the debt. And that's the problem is every elected official knows it is political suicide to even talk about the debt or talk about fixing Social Security. So what do? We just wait for it to run out and then we say, well, too bad. I don't know.
No, and I absolutely agree with you. I guess the question is we've got to do something for Social Security because not that it's a great system, but it's not so much. But can we afford not to have it?
Right.
That's really that's so. You know, I would think that you'd have 50% of the senior citizens today that would be unable to afford their living style if it hadn't been for Social Security. They'd be out there on the street. I mean,
Right.
who knows where they'd be? And and as a society, you pay for that. You say, "Well, I'm not paying for Social Security," but when you have homeless on the street, when you're in a place like in San Francisco, your place in Los Angeles, and the place is overtaken by homeless people, you're paying the price.
But so here's the thing though, when you look at a place like California,
Yes.
they're spending billions of dollars. They've created what we call the homeless industrial complex.
Yes.
I mean, this is the problem that fundamentally, again, going back to the emotionalism of government, is they create these pools of money without, they call them the guardrails. So you look at the fraud that's been exposed
Yes.
recently, the Leering centers, the hospice
Yeah.
fraud,
Yeah.
and that's the problem. All that's based in emotionalism. Oh, we need hospice care. Think of the poor people that don't have hospice care. Somebody out there is taking advantage of that. You know, again, for the children, for the elderly, when we create those systems for the homeless. And I was recently watching something about the homeless industrial complex in California, where they're buying hotels and condos and turning them into homeless facilities. But then the cost, you're better off just giving that person a check. You're better off at the end of the day, you're better off just giving that you could, you know, we spend more on a homeless person than the median income, right? I mean, again,
Yes.
we're spending so much money, and again, I would have no problem with that if you were solving the problem.
Yes.
But you're not. They're still homeless. You have,
Yes.
billions of dollars being spent on the homeless, and the homeless aren't seeing a benefit from it, and it's just costing me money. So again, it sounds selfish, but if you're not solving the problem, just give me my money back at that point. You're not solving the problem, and that becomes the issue. Is again, it becomes emotional people in government. And then if I dare say, hey, maybe we should reform the hospice system in California. Maybe we should reform the homeless industrial. Now, how dare you? You're going to kill it. Just like they said, Elon killed thousands of people with Doge, right? That's what the media tells us. Doge trying to reform and trying to cut spending costs thousands of lives.
Yeah.
And that's on Elon, right? I mean, that's the emotionalism that we're up against.
Yeah, no, I'm very much in favor. As I say, I'm in favor of Social Security, and the argument for that is that you've done something, you've paid into it.
Right.
You may not pay enough into it, but you've done something, you paid into it. I am against these programs giving people something that they've not paid into,
Right.
paid nothing into them, and so you're disincentivizing these people. You're too poor to get off of it.
Well, or in that, like I said, but again, going back to the small business owner, you're getting too many incentives to get off of it to go get a job. I've heard that on numerous occasions. People say I would give up more benefits than going to get a job. So just that initial hurdle of,
Yes.
I get free, I get food, I get health, I get childcare, I get healthcare,
Yes.
all these things that I get for free, going back to everything's free. Why would I go get a job and make less, get less out of the deal?
No.
So again, we have to disincentivize, we have to de-incentivize that ideology, because, but again, it's a bigger problem than you and I are going to solve today. But, that's the kind of thing that I keep thinking about is if I want to create a better society, if I want, we are on the verge of insolvency in this country, right?
Yes.
I mean, we're on the verge of, with that $39 trillion in debt, we have $1 trillion going to debt service, which is, we bring in $7 trillion, a trillion of that is debt service. The debt continues to grow. Eventually it's going to be $2 trillion. It's the single biggest line item of the budget now. It's surpassed military spending. That's a problem.
Well, your founding fathers, they had an idea. If you didn't own property,
Right.
you couldn't vote.
Right.
And basically the idea was if you don't have a dog in the fight. So what has happened today is, of course, you've got people that do not own property, will never get property, have no intention of getting property, but they are deciding what people with property will do.
Right.
I mean, that's so, and as a result, it's a disincentive to people with property to continue working and continuing doing things because they're getting less and less and doing more and more. And like you started out, I think basically what you're saying, That's you're working, to support people that are not working.
And they have no intention to work.
No intention of working.
I mean, or they have no skills. And that's what I talk about quite a bit, is that, if the people that spent all that time complaining, if you spent a little bit of that time learning a skill, and again,
Yes.
I talk to trades all the time, like for my son, he's probably not going to go into college, he'll probably go into the trades. Every trade, I hear this from everybody. He said, if you were willing to show up and put your phone down and pay attention,
yes.
we don't care what you look like. We don't care anything about you. If you're willing to show up and work, we will put you to work and we will pay you well to do it. I mean, we are so desperate for trades right now.
Yep.
And why is it? Because nobody wants to get dirty. I could stay home and play video games instead of getting dirty and building something. Go,
Right.
So I mean, again, that's the kind of thing where I say, what is the long term for this country if we have a society where nobody, at the end of the day, though, whether you're producer Elon Musk or you're the guy that's building a skyscraper, we need those people to keep this country moving forward. And fewer and people, I mean, nobody wants to work in the coal mine, but somebody has to do it. And that it's going to take time. Working at the mill or working in the coal mine takes years off your life, but you do it to feed your family. But if the government's going to pay you to stay home, why would I risk my life for that?
Well,
So-
history repeats itself, doesn't it?
History is cyclical, as I say. So, I mean, again, I don't, I look at the economy, I look at everything right now, and I think we're, it's funny that we don't call it the roaring 20s because we know what happened in 1929. So, I mean, that same idea is like, are we overdue for some sort of massive correction? And if we get to the point where the government isn't there to take care of us, like you said, we may get to a point where we just don't have the ability to take care of people. And now all of a sudden, people that for generations have been dependent on whether it's government or Amazon or, the pizza delivery guy, now all of a sudden, now I've got to grow my own vegetables and take care of myself. How many, are those people going to step up and work together? Are the neighbors going to come together, and or there's going to be chaos? There's going to be chaos in the streets. I don't know.
Al Pacino had a kid in his 80s, so
Well, okay. Let's okay. Without getting into a biology lesson, yes, Al Pacino, but women cannot
his
have.
girlfriend is 29.
Well, there you go.
Well, I'll tell you a story. I guess we'll end on this story, but I had a very good, a nice client, and he came from Mexico, and he worked his butt off, and he was in his 70s, and he married this young woman, 20,
Yeah.
21, and he had 6 children. 6 children. So he was 75. And then one day she said, I want to divorce you. Like you see. So
After she got her 10 years in at that point, I guess what point was it she wanted the divorce?
oh no, she was a permanent resident.
Okay.
Yeah, no, so she had no problem that way. And so she said, so she wanted a divorce. And I said, well, I said, okay. And he was going to be paying, he was working like crazy. I mean, he did brutal work, but he made a lot, he made a decent sum of money. She's going to pay support. And she was going to go back to Mexico, you see, and live the high life on the support he was paying.
Right.
And so he said, yeah. I said, well, are you sure those children are yours?
Oh yeah.
He said, of course they're mine. And I said, well, let's get a blood test. So I had the support. And of course, I had to twist his arm behind his back, and finally we got the blood test. And of course, the blood test, and none of them were his children.
Yeah.
No. But, and then it turned out that she took a vacation every year down around Christmas time, down to Mexico. And 9 months later, from that vacation, she had a child.
Yeah.
So
But again, it's such. I'm sure you were heartbroken for him.
yes,
But again, you were a voice of reason for a guy who's emotionally, loved that woman, loved the children.
yes,
And again, my wife's a lawyer, and you guys, you go through a lot with that because you have, again, sounds like a great guy, worked his butt off his whole life. And that's what happens when you're the good guy that works hard. Somebody comes along and takes advantage of you.
yes.
And that's the unfortunate reality of our world.
Well, of course, he of course wanted to take her youth. That comes at a cost. When you're in your 70s and you want to, it comes at a cost.
Right.
You Yeah, there's different commodities. There's money and there's youth and there's all kinds of things. But anyway, so that was that. So I guess that's it. Is have we? I think we solved everything.
We solved all of our world problems. Yeah, so I am on WJOB. You can find it WJOB 1230 AM in the region. You can find us on YouTube, WJOB 1230. We'll continue to solve the world's problems Monday morning, bright and early on WJOB. So thank you.
That time again?
From usually 6 to 8, 6 to 8:30, something like that.
Yeah.
But the nice thing about that early morning slot, all the hardworking people are up.
Yes.
So a lot of the
Yes.
people that listen to me, they're the hard workers. They're the guys that get up early, go to work. And so all the people, all the other ones are all still in bed. And so,
Well, that's the thing. Just end on that. Most times, a lot of people do not listen to the radio, but they listen to the radio in the car.
right.
And you're on the time when people are driving to work,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's a very good slot.
And that's why I think about them. I always say, I said, I'm thinking about you guys, the ones that are, you're putting in, you're getting up early, you're going to work. A lot of the ones that are building this country, and we never, or the first responders, the people working, those are the people. And I always appreciate my audience. I say they're the smartest audience in the area because they listen to me every Monday morning.
Although my wife says this, she's very impressed with the Midwest. We come from the East Coast, and she says this all the time. Sometimes we take this for advantage, for granted, but we're on the highway. We get up, we have to go on vacation, and it's 4:00 in the morning. There are trucks out there.
Mm-hmm.
Trucks out there, hundreds of trucks. Somebody's driving those trucks.
Right.
Somebody's up at 4:00 in the morning. Somebody's driving
but-
all night
yeah.
long. You see people going to work in the great Midwest at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So the work ethic is not dead here in the great Midwest. I mean, it's getting weaker maybe, but it's not dead. And people, people put in a hard day's work, and people, it's still. I've been in California. I spent a lot of time in California. I spent a lot of time in New York. I spent a lot of time in New Jersey. Spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania. I'm here in Indiana. And Indiana, by far, is the best place I've ever lived. Best place I've ever lived.
The only thing it's missing is another Bear stadium.
We
Need a stadium.
But
It was slick. As soon as I was there,
heaven on earth, and so
There you go.
That go at that.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. You have to get up early one morning and come join me on the radio.
Yes, that would be great. That would be great. Enjoy that.
Fantastic.
Hopefully, I won't be sitting at the table drinking coffee with my wife, thinking to myself, "Yeah, we're going to do something on Monday."